first 3 Sundays in Advent anticipate the arrival of Jesus. And on this fourth Sunday, we shift our focus to the birth of Jesus, the incarnation. As we prepare for this upcoming celebration, we hear a portion of the birth from the Gospel of Matthew. This gospel focuses on establishing Jesus as an heir of David, of the law. The genealogy at the beginning of the gospel traces Jesus all the way back to Abraham. According to Matthew, biological kinship means far less than legal kinship. Joseph may not be the biological father of Jesus, but the genealogy claims him as father, places him in the royal lineage of David. To understand this, we need to be clear about traditions at the time of Jesus' birth. In ancient times, a wife was first sought from the circle of close relatives without violating the incest prohibition outlined. The future spouses were very young by today's standards. 12 was the minimum age for girls, 13 for boys. Usually parents would arrange the relationships at their young age, although marriages based on attraction did occur. Upon completion of the contract, the couple often continued to live with their respective families until the marriage ceremony. The bride would move to the groom's house. Once both sets of parents agreed on the price of the mohar, dowry, that future groom would pay to the bride's father, and the two couple were considered engaged. That meant they were legally bound together in a indissoluble bond, except through a bill of divorce. And this seems to be the situation that Mary and Joseph find themselves in. A betrothal period when adultery, a subsequent conception, grounds for punishment. It's like stoning to death. But Joseph is portrayed as a virtuous man, a man who observes the law as the will of God. He has learned the commandments at a young age and has been obedient, faithful, older. Had Joseph not been a righteous man, this story might have been. Joseph doesn't want to publicly disgrace Mary, so he plans to be quiet. His regard for the law is balanced by an extraordinary sense of compassion, a compassion that exemplifies the higher values of the kingdom, someday be proclaimed by Jesus. Now, in the ancient world, dreams were believed to be a means of divine revelations. Before Joseph can take any action, the angel of the Lord appears to him and tells him it will not dishonor his status as a son in the line of David. Accept this child. The angel tells Joseph that Mary's child was begotten through the Holy Spirit. There'll be a son. Joseph will name the child, meaning God saves. Dr. James F. Kay, a professor and dean at Princeton Theological Seminary, writes, message of Advent is that when heaven itself is spinning into oblivion, when every star on the moral compass is wavering, when all hell is breaking loose on earth, your redemption is drawing. That has to be a pretty close approximation of what Joseph was thinking. Can you identify that feeling of discombobulation? I can, and I'll tell you, last week when I found myself in Eucharistic Prayer B and you all were in C, it's like having a map of Dallas and being in Houston. Heart goes out to poor Joseph. Can you imagine what he went through? I know what I went through, beating myself up all week. On this fourth Sunday of Advent, God is sending us a Christmas card. But it's different than the ones that we usually see. Calm, serene family, adoring a baby. A few days before Christmas, We are greeted by the story of Joseph. Joseph bolting up out of bed in the middle of the night. Joseph, the carpenter, having his life totally turned upside down. Joseph, who with his wife will become. Joseph does what he puts pieces of wood together to build something new. That night when the angel comes to visit, Joseph is jolted by the command to receive, to love, to nurture, and to protect. Joseph the builder is confronted by a God who disrupts, a God who disjoins, a God who discombobulates Joseph's life in order to use him. God's plan. All of this understanding, this background information, sets the stage for us to look ahead toward the birth of Jesus and reflect on what it means. The story of Joseph reminds us that sometimes through the encounters, the visitations, and the confusion, through the demands of a living, moving, and infinitely resourceful God, Joseph still somewhat discombobulated. The miracle of Christmas is that God's Son is born as this is the This is God. Jesus is formed just as we're formed, one cell at a time. As a vulnerable baby, his existence dependent on the nurture of his parents. As he grows, his parents. Joseph accepts this message from out of the blue. He chose. And this story today reminds us that as important as it is to live sober, righteous, and prudent lives, after all, we are Anglican, there is much more in God's universe that is charged with the potential of shaking us out of our complacency and assurance. Joseph sets an example for all of us. For a person of faith, it's not just hearing the call that matters, also having underlying character, internal wisdom, and to respond to that call. Joseph journeys toward the first Christmas. The only thing he knows is that God promises something wonderful. May each of us today listen for similar, not necessarily knowing where it will take us, but assured that God has set a path before us to follow, just as he did for Joseph. Regardless of how discombobulated we may feel, it worked for the shepherds, it worked for the wise men, and it seems to have worked for Joseph. Have faith.